The humidity of the late July evening clung to my skin as I stepped out of the rideshare, the scent of impending rain mixing with the exhaust fumes of downtown Chicago traffic. Ahead, the tasteful, understated sign of Eleanor's Table glowed softly. It was one of those places Adam's family favored. Expensive, classic American cuisine, with lighting dim enough to flatter, but bright enough to read the menu. Populated by people who looked like they summered in places I only read about in magazines. Tonight was supposedly a celebration for my father-in-law, David's, recent successful merger deal at his investment firm. Adam had mentioned it casually earlier in the week. Mom's booking Eleanor's for Friday, celebrating Dad's deal. Around 7:30? Sounds good, I'd replied, making a mental note. It wasn't unusual for plans with Adam's family to be communicated through him in a slightly vague manner. My mother-in-law, Claire, wasn't exactly my biggest fan, a fact she made subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, clear. She operated under a veneer of perfect politeness that barely concealed a current of disapproval. I often felt like an exhibit she was forced to tolerate in the museum of her perfect family life. Adam, bless his conflict-avoidant heart, usually acted as a buffer, albeit a somewhat porous one. I smoothed down my navy blue sheath dress, feeling a familiar flutter of apprehension, mingle with the determination to just get through the evening pleasantly. I genuinely liked David. He was gruff, but fair, and seemed to genuinely appreciate the stability I brought to Adam's life. It was Claire, and by extension her two devoted daughters, Charlotte and Emma, who formed the phalanx of polite frostiness I had to navigate. Pushing through the heavy oak door, I was met with a wave of cool air and the low murmur of conversation. The maitre d', a distinguished man with silver hair and an impeccably tailored suit, stood behind a polished mahogany lectern. "Good evening. Welcome to Eleanor's Table," he said, with a practiced smile. "Good evening," I returned, matching his smile. "I'm meeting my family, the party arranged by Claire." He consulted his tablet, tapping the screen a few times. His brow furrowed slightly. "Ah, yes. I have a reservation for 5, under Claire." "Oh, okay," I said, slightly confused. 5? There was Claire, David, Adam, Charlotte, Emma, and me. That made 6. Perhaps my husband Adam made a separate booking, or maybe I was added later. "My name is Sarah." The maitre d' scrolled again, his professional calm unwavering. "I'm sorry, madam. I only have the one reservation for 5 under Claire. No other bookings for Adam or Sarah." He looked genuinely apologetic. "Perhaps they are already seated. I can check the dining room." "Thank you. I'd appreciate that," I said, trying to quell the rising unease. Mistakes happen, right? Maybe Adam forgot to tell his mom I'd confirmed. Maybe Claire just miscounted. But a cold knot was forming in my stomach, a familiar feeling when dealing with the family matriarch. Just as the maitre d' turned, a voice cut through the hushed ambiance, sharp and brittle despite its attempt at lightness. "Sarah, what on earth are you doing here?" I turned. There stood Claire, flanked by Charlotte and Emma. Claire was dressed in a cream-colored Chanel-style jacket and trousers that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her blonde hair was perfectly coiffed, and her expression was one of carefully constructed surprise, but her eyes held a glint of something sharp, triumphant. Charlotte, ever her mother's echo, wore a smirk that pulled unattractively at her lipsticked mouth. Emma, slightly less bold, just looked smug. "Claire," I said, keeping my voice even. "Adam mentioned dinner tonight for David's deal?" "Around 7:30? Claire tilted her head, her smile tightening. "Oh, that. Yes, well, there seems to have been a little misunderstanding." She gestured vaguely towards the dining room entrance. This little celebration was just for the immediate family. David, myself, and the children. The emphasis on immediate and children, referring to her 30-something offspring, hung in the air like cheap perfume. My gaze flickered past her shoulder. Through the archway leading to the main dining area, I could see Adam already seated at a round table with his father. He looked up, saw me standing there with his mother and sisters, and his eyes widened slightly before immediately flicking down to study the tablecloth with intense interest. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. David looked over too, a questioning look on his face, but Claire had positioned herself perfectly to block his direct line of sight to the drama unfolding at the entrance. So, there it was. No mistake, no miscommunication. This was deliberate. Claire had intentionally booked a table for 5, excluding me, and hadn't bothered to tell Adam, or more likely, had told him in a way that allowed him to plead ignorance, or simply avoid the confrontation he knew would ensue if he told me. His discomfort was palpable even from across the room. He knew, and he hadn't said a word. The knot in my stomach tightened, but alongside it, something else began to bubble up. It wasn't anger, not yet. It wasn't even hurt, though a flicker of that passed through me. It was absurdity. The sheer, calculated pettiness of it all struck me as profoundly, almost comically pathetic. Here we were, grown adults, playing out some high school clique exclusion ritual in a restaurant that charged $50 for a crab cake appetizer. And then, it happened. A small giggle escaped me. Claire's perfectly sculpted eyebrows shot up. Charlotte's smirk faltered, replaced by confusion. Emma blinked. The giggle turned into a soft laugh. Not hysterical, not mocking, just amused. Genuinely amused by the sheer ridiculousness of the situation Claire had orchestrated. "Oh, Claire," I said, shaking my head slightly, a smile playing on my lips. "Immediate family. Of course. How silly of me." Her eyes narrowed. This wasn't the reaction she'd expected. She'd anticipated tears, a scene, a hasty retreat in humiliation. My amusement seemed to throw her off balance. I turned back to the maitre d', who had been observing this exchange with the practiced neutrality of a Swiss diplomat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice light and clear. "Would Antoine happen to be in this evening?" Before my marriage to Adam, before I transitioned into corporate event planning, I had spent nearly a decade managing high-end restaurants and boutique hotels, first in New York and then here in Chicago. Antoine, the owner of Eleanor's Table, was a legend in the industry. We'd crossed paths at numerous galas, charity events, and industry conferences. We weren't close friends, but we had a cordial professional relationship built on mutual respect for the demanding world we both inhabited. The maitre d's eyes flickered with recognition. "Antoine is indeed here this evening, madam. He's currently overseeing service in the main dining room." "Wonderful," I said. "Would you mind telling him Sarah is here and would love to say a quick hello when he has a moment?" Claire looked momentarily flustered. "Sarah, really, this isn't necessary." "Oh, but I insist," I said brightly, turning my smile fully on her. "It's always nice to catch up with old colleagues." "You 3 go ahead. Wouldn't want David and Adam thinking you've abandoned them." I gave a little wave towards their table, where Adam was now studiously avoiding looking in our direction, while David was frowning openly at Claire's back. Charlotte and Emma exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to proceed now that the script had deviated from their mother's plan. Claire, recovering her composure, gave a tight nod. "Very well. Enjoy your chat." She spun on her heel, her posture rigid, and swept towards the table, her daughters trailing in her wake like obedient, slightly confused cygnets. The maitre d' discreetly spoke into his mouthpiece. Within a minute, Antoine emerged from the dining room. He was exactly as I remembered, mid-50s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and an air of effortless command. "Sarah," he exclaimed, his face breaking into a warm, genuine smile as he approached, extending a hand. "What a pleasant surprise. It's been too long. Antoine, I greeted him, shaking his hand warmly. It's wonderful to see you too. The place looks stunning, as always. You're too kind, he demurred, though his eyes twinkled. What brings you here tonight? Not another impossible-to-please charity gala committee, I hope. He joked, referencing a particularly challenging event we'd both navigated years ago. I laughed. Nothing quite so dramatic, thankfully. Actually, I lowered my voice slightly, glancing towards the family table where Claire was now talking animatedly to David, likely spinning her version of events. I arrived expecting to join my husband's family for dinner, but it appears there was a slight oversight in the reservation numbers. I kept my tone light, factual. They seem to be a party of 5, and I make 6. Antoine's gaze flickered briefly towards their table. He knew the family, of course. They were regulars, the kind of old money, consistent clientele that formed the bedrock of places like Eleanor's. His expression didn't change, but I saw a subtle flicker of understanding in his eyes. He was a master reader of situations. It was part of his job. Ah, he said smoothly. A common occurrence on busy evenings. Reservations can be complex. He offered no judgment, just professional discretion. Indeed, I agreed. So, I find myself unexpectedly solo for dinner. I was wondering, any chance you could squeeze in a table for one? I promised to be an easy guest. His smile widened. For you, Sarah? Always. Consider it my pleasure. In fact, he glanced around thoughtfully. I have a lovely little alcove table, quite private, but with an excellent view of the dining room. Would that suit? It was perfect. Tucked away enough to feel intimate, but positioned so I could subtly observe the family drama unfold without being directly in their line of fire. Antoine, that would be absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. Right this way, he said, personally escorting me past the now occupied lectern and into the main dining room. As we walked past their table, I offered them all a serene smile. David looked bewildered. Adam flinched, looking down again. Charlotte and Emma stared, mouths slightly agape. Claire's face was a mask of barely controlled fury, her knuckles white where she gripped her water glass. Antoine seated me at a small, beautifully set table in a softly lit corner, partially screened by a tasteful arrangement of ferns. Enjoy your dinner, Sarah, he said warmly. Anything you need, just let Javier know. He gestured to a nearby waiter. It's on the house tonight. Antoine, you really don't have to. I started, genuinely touched but also aware of the professional courtesy. Nonsense, he waved a hand dismissively. Professional courtesy. And frankly, he leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Anyone who can handle the Vanderhouten wedding seating chart deserves a free meal now and then. He winked, referring to another infamous event from our shared past, and then retreated gracefully back into the flow of the restaurant. I settled into the plush velvet chair, a strange sense of calm washing over me. Okay, this wasn't the evening I'd planned, but maybe it was better. I ordered a glass of Sancerre, my favorite, and the pan-seared scallops I'd been eyeing on the online menu. From my vantage point, I had a clear, if slightly sideways view of their table. The atmosphere over there was thick with tension. David looked confused and slightly irritated, occasionally glancing my way with a questioning frown. Adam looked utterly miserable, pushing his food around his plate and contributing little to the conversation. Charlotte and Emma seemed to have lost their earlier smugness, now looking awkward and unsure, whispering to each other. And Claire? Claire was attempting to hold court, talking brightly, gesturing emphatically, but her jaw was tight, and her eyes kept darting towards my table with ill-concealed resentment. Theirs looked like the most uncomfortable celebratory dinner in history. Mine, on the other hand, was shaping up quite nicely. The Sancerre was crisp and cold. The bread basket arrived with 3 different types of artisanal bread and soft whipped butter. Javier, my waiter, was attentive but unobtrusive. The low lighting, the soft jazz playing overhead, the quiet confidence of being perfectly fine, on my own. It was actually rather lovely. I savored every bite of my scallops when they arrived. They were cooked perfectly, sweet and tender with a beautiful golden crust, nestled on a bed of creamy risotto with asparagus tips. I took my time, enjoying the flavors, the wine, the quiet hum of the restaurant. I occasionally caught Adam's eye. He looked wretched, torn between loyalty to his mother and his betrayal of me. I offered him a small, neutral smile each time, which only seemed to deepen his discomfort. Good. Maybe some discomfort was exactly what he needed. As I was contemplating the dessert menu, the flourless chocolate torte sounded divine. I saw Claire push back her chair and stand up. My internal radar went on high alert. She smoothed down her already immaculate jacket and began weaving her way through the tables towards me. Charlotte and Emma watched her go, looking nervous. Adam slumped further in his chair. David just looked resigned. She arrived at my table, stopping just short of crowding me. Her smile was back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Those were cold, hard chips of blue ice. "Sarah," she began, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry over the gentle buzz, but not loud enough to cause a scene. "Enjoying your solo performance?" I looked up, deliberately taking a slow sip of my wine before answering. "Immensely, Claire, thank you for asking. The scallops were divine, and Antoine was kind enough to seat me at this lovely table." I kept my tone pleasant, conversational. Her smile tightened further. "Yes, well, Antoine always did have a soft spot for service staff." The pause was deliberate, the implication clear. She was trying to diminish me, to put me back in my perceived place, referencing my past in the hospitality industry as if it were something shameful, something that made me inherently less than her, forever the help, even when dining at my own table. This was her final volley, her attempt to regain control, to land a blow that would wound my pride where her earlier exclusion had failed. For a moment, I felt a flash of heat, the old defensiveness rising. Years of navigating subtle classism and overt snobbery in my previous career had given me thick skin, but Claire had a unique talent for finding the tiny chinks in the armor. But then, I looked at her perfectly maintained facade barely, concealing a bitter, insecure woman so threatened by her daughter-in-law that she resorted to childish games. I thought about my own career, the demanding, complex world I'd not only survived but thrived in, the skills I'd honed managing budgets bigger than her yearly charity donations, dealing with egos far larger and more fragile than hers, creating seamless experiences out of pure chaos. I thought about the respect I'd earned, the reputation I'd built, the successful business I now co-owned. And I smiled again, a genuine, confident smile this time. "Actually, Claire," I said, my voice level and clear, meeting her icy gaze without flinching. "My background taught me invaluable lessons. It taught me how to manage difficult situations and demanding people with grace and efficiency." I let that hang in the air for a beat, my eyes holding hers. "It taught me the importance of making everyone feel welcome, regardless of their background. And it taught me how to recognize when someone is trying to create unnecessary drama." I paused, taking another leisurely sip of wine. "They're skills that prove surprisingly useful in all sorts of social situations. Wouldn't you agree?" The color drained from Claire's face. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. She hadn't expected a direct, calm rebuttal. She'd expected me to crumble or lash out. My composure, my refusal to be baited, my subtle turning of her insult back onto her own behavior, left her momentarily speechless. Behind her, I could see Charlotte and Emma exchange wide-eyed looks. Even Adam seemed to sit up a little straighter, a flicker of something unreadable. Surprise? Admiration? in his eyes before it was quickly extinguished. Claire visibly gathered herself, pulling her dignity around her like a shield. "Well," she said stiffly, "I'm glad you're comfortable." She couldn't quite bring herself to say, "enjoying yourself." "Perfectly," I confirmed cheerfully. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I was just about to order dessert. The chocolate torte sounds exquisite." I picked up the dessert menu, effectively dismissing her. For a second, I thought she might say something else, but then she seemed to deflate slightly. She gave a curt, jerky nod and turned, walking back to her table with a ramrod straight back that didn't quite conceal her defeat. The atmosphere at the family table, which had been tense before, now seemed positively glacial. I ordered the chocolate torte. It was indeed exquisite. Rich, dark, and decadent. I ate every last bite, pairing it with a small glass of port Antoine had sent over, compliments of the house. I didn't rush. I lingered over the last sips, watching the uncomfortable silence that had enveloped Claire and her family. David finally seemed to be quietly but firmly speaking to Claire, who listened with a stony expression. Adam stared into the distance. Charlotte and Emma were engrossed in their phones. Eventually, I signaled for my check. Javier brought it over promptly. Despite Antoine's generosity regarding the meal itself, I left a generous tip, knowing the value of good service and wanting to ensure the staff knew their efforts were appreciated, regardless of the family drama they'd witnessed. As I gathered my purse, I glanced one last time towards their table. Adam looked up, catching my eye. He had a pained, apologetic look on his face. I met his gaze steadily for a moment, then gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. "Not tonight, Adam. We would talk later. Oh yes, we would have a long, difficult conversation about loyalty, courage, and his mother's manipulations. But not tonight. Tonight was about surviving Claire's ambush with my dignity intact." I walked towards the exit, my head held high. The maitre d' offered a respectful nod as I passed. Outside, the air was thick and damp, the threatened rain finally beginning to fall in fat, heavy drops. I hailed a cab, the city lights reflecting wetly on the pavement. Settling back against the worn vinyl seat, I let out a long breath. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't let Claire win by reducing me to a puddle of hurt feelings. I had laughed, I had enjoyed a superb meal, and I had calmly deflected her nastiness. It wasn't a victory in the grand scheme of the ongoing family saga, perhaps. The underlying issues remained. Adam's spinelessness in the face of his mother's. Machinations was a deep, persistent problem we needed to address. But tonight, faced with deliberate exclusion and public humiliation, I hadn't just survived. I had carved out my own space. I had asked for and received my own seat at the table. And somehow, dining alone, I had felt more powerful and self-possessed than I ever did trying to fit in at theirs. The rain drummed against the roof of the cab, washing the city clean, and I smiled. The chocolate torte had been worth it.